I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
For everyone who rushed to get to this episode, yes, we will talk about William Nylander. There's other stuff we're going to talk about too, like All-Star representatives. Ilya Samsonov will come up as well. The World Juniors will come up as well. The PWHL too. But I'd like to ask you, CJ, how's life? How are things? How was the holidays? It feels like it's been a minute. I know there was an episode that dropped earlier this week, but we pre-recorded that. It's actually been quite some time since we've seen each other.
Yeah, I know the OGs have probably figured out by now the last couple were put in the tank ahead of time, which was good. It gave you time to go back to Montreal, gave producer Nick time, gave myself some time. I must admit, I feel like not rusty, that would be overstating it, but it's just like a little out of practice because we do have the normal rhythm and we haven't recorded one of these in real time in a little while. So I'm good. The holidays were great. Lots of time with family and a little bit of time to unplug. And I feel a little like, oh man, it's just weird to get back into the routine. But man, it's 2024. I'm hopeful. I think great things are ahead. It should be an abundant, amazing year. And I'm ready to get after it.
Did you write your goals for 2024 yet?
Not done yet, but pondered. I pondered them. Okay. But I haven't put pen to paper yet.
I wrote a few. I'll add a few more to that list, but I do have a few. But I'm really glad you got some time off, and I'm grateful that everyone got to listen to some of the last few episodes while we were on a break. But now we're back at it, and now we need to delve into these topics. William Nylander. Nick Kyprios dropping a bomb on everyone earlier this week, saying that 11.25 mil, that could be the number. It's around there. Maybe it's that. We could see a resolution soon. Who knows? Please add some clarification to the William Nylander situation, a story we have been chasing all season long to this point.
I don't know if it was a bomb, and I'm not trying to correct you or Nick either. It's like one of these ones. Of course, it makes a stir. My sense of where we're at with William Nylander and the Leafs is that they've been digging away at this for quite a long time now. They've been having a continued dialogue, and we are now getting closer to the point where I think they have to make a deal. When I say closer, I still think there's time until the trade deadline, even time until the All-Star break, potential sort of soft deadlines you could put in place. But, there's definitely been, I think, a little bit of understanding about where this is headed. 8 years is what we're expecting for the term. I think 11 million potentially plus is basically the range for where the salary is going. And I think that the talks are in a healthy place. But, as we're recording this, it's been stressed to me from multiple people that this thing ain't done and that there's still, a lot, I guess, that needs to fall into place before you're you're taking the contract to the league, you're getting it signed, you're having a press conference, you're smiling and kissing babies and doing all the things you do when you announce a big contract. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of what happened with David Pastrnak last year in Boston, where for that entire season, there was a grind of a contract negotiation behind the scenes. It never any sense he was leaving Boston, but, it didn't happen quickly or easily. Even if you look in January and February, there's all these reports. They're close. The contract was finalized on March 2nd. I'm not saying it's going to take till March 2nd to get Nylander done, but, I would caution anyone who's expecting this any minute now that it's not a foregone conclusion. I think that there's still some issues to be worked out here. But talks are in a good place, and let's face it. I mean, there's a couple ways for us to attack this story, right? Nylander has wanted to be a Leaf all along. They've wanted him to be a player on their team all along. Brad Treliving on the first day of training camp said this is a priority. It's now an imperative. I mean, when you see the way Nylander has performed this year, how well he's played, I don't think the Leafs have a choice, honestly. And I know the number is going to, people out there will either bash it, or I'm sure there'll be these columns of anonymous, people working for other teams taking a kick at the contract when it's done. I mean, because that's, we've seen this sort of thing happen. But I don't think the Leafs have a choice, quite honestly. And I expect the number to be north of 11 million when it's all said and done. I don't I don't know where that's going to land. I would suspect, based on sort of what I know, is that the number itself isn't fully defined. I think the range is pretty clear here, but how that money gets paid out in terms of the signing bonuses and everything else could dictate a little bit one way or the other where the actual AAV lands. But, we're talking about a player that's going to surpass Mitch Marner, I believe, on Marner's current deal, is where, you're going to see Nylander land. He's going to be second behind Austin Matthews on the Leafs on AAVs when this is done. And I do expect it to get done at some point in time, but we're not there just yet. So I don't want to, I'm probably radioing myself already. I don't even know what I've said. I'm trying to be very measured and clear, but I'm sure I've said too much already in some way.
I can't wait until someone takes what you've said and then turns it into an exaggeration of what you've said, and it turns out to incite an entire fan base into thinking you said one thing when you said something else, because that never happens.
Let's not go back down that road.
No.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, look, this is in a good spot. It's not done. But, if you want high-level takeaways, like if you just want to know, if you don't want to get into all the minutia and you're a big Leafs fan, or maybe if you're a fan of another team, but you're just curious about where this sits, I think all signs are pointing to an 8-year deal for Nylander getting done in Toronto at some point here in the future. I just don't know if the future is 3 weeks or 3 days. And I don't think that the key principal people involved at this point know if it's going to be 3 weeks or 3 days until it's done. But I mean, there's a general understanding at the table. You can't let this drift on forever. I think they've made some ground. They're trying their best to keep it all under a lid. And it is pointing in a positive direction, but it's certainly not done as we're recording this tonight.
I have 2 follow-up questions. One smaller picture question, the other one larger picture question. Let's start with the smaller one. So we know there's a money figure out there. We know the Leafs know this is important for them to do. What is the holdup from this coming together like now? What's the one thing that's holding this up?
Well, I think William Nylander is probably pushing for something more like $11.5 million on an 8-year deal. I'm sure the Leafs are trying to keep it to more like $11 million or 10.95 or, but I mean, like, and so there can be a little bit of a negotiation, even when you've got to a healthy spot with talks about exactly where that number lands, depending on how the money's paid out and if it's all up front. And, obviously there's trade clauses and things that go in these deals. Like, I think that even when you get to a healthy spot, there's still a little bit of wiggle room at the end about where it ends up. And so that's probably a part of it, I would say. I mean, the other part of it is just functional. The Leafs are in California as we're recording this on a road trip. I'm not saying it can't ever get done when you're on a road trip. I remember years ago, Dion Phaneuf's, I believe it was an 8-year extension, a long-term extension in Toronto got done the day before the Winter Classic when we were in Ann Arbor, Michigan. That's a different Leafs regime, different time. But I mean, an example of in season, a major contract, a major decision with the team captain at the time. You can do that stuff on the road, but I think generally it's not where the business gets done. And so, I think that's maybe the best way to articulate it. The other is, deadlines tend to move, to spur action. And so I can say to you, Julian, I want this. And you can say, I want that. And you sort of need the deadline where maybe we move. And so maybe the deadline hasn't quite got here. But, I think if we sort of, again, zoom out, it's all headed in a good direction. But I've been saying that all along. I don't know if you remember the episode early in the season. I think I said I'd be 90% sure it's going to get done or something like that. And everyone went nuts at the time. And I was like, what, was that a hot take? Because it didn't, to me, I've never not thought he was not going to sign in Toronto. Like, I've yet to have any moment in time where I felt like the talks were either off the rails or there just was a misunderstanding. I mean, William Nylander couldn't be more clear. He wants to be a Leaf, and he followed up his best ever season last year. If you remember, his best season was 2 years ago by points and the goals and assists. Then last year was the next best, 40 goals, 87 points, I believe it was. He's now on pace, as we're recording this, for over 115 points. He's continued to get better. He's clearly more important to the team. He's playing a higher role on the penalty kill. He's playing more minutes in general for the Leafs this year. He's producing more, and he wants to be in Toronto. And I don't think that's ever changed. I don't think that there's ever this sort of like low key, but he's trying to angle himself to this situation on July 1st. I think truly he's been open with his intent. And I think the Leafs from their side have been the same way. And so, where you're going to end up is this is going to be a way bigger contract than the average observer would have probably said last June. But it's kind of hard to argue with what you're seeing. I mean, he's got points in 31 of 35 games this year, well inside the top 10 in scoring. Been probably the Leafs' most complete player. I mean, Austin Matthews is coming off a ridiculous December where he scored 15 goals, and he's going to be the Leafs All-Star nominee when they announce that on Thursday night. But I do think that Nylander will join him there ultimately. And so he's kind of done everything he can do, and the team's taken its time. And I think they're going to get to where they need to get to, but they're not quite there just yet.
Then let me ask my big picture question. Could the Leafs realistically afford a core that has Austin Matthews making a little over 13 mil, John Tavares at least through 2025 making 11 mil, Mitch Marner making a shade under 11 mil, and then William Nylander reaching that point?
Yes. The reason they can do it is because the salary cap's going up $4 million next year. They have a ton of money due to come off the books, whether that's TJ Brody, Max Domi, Tyler Bertuzzi. These are all expiring contracts. And so from a functional standpoint, if you factor in, the idea that Matthews' extension kicks in next season, so he's getting a raise of $1.6 million to next season. Nylander's looking at a raise here, potentially of $4 million, maybe a little bit more. I mean, it's a lot. I'm not denying that, but that's basically soaked up by the natural rise in the NHL salary cap. And then you couple that with the fact that the Leafs have contracts coming off the books. I didn't even include Ilya Samsonov, but he's also an expiring deal this season. The Leafs can very much make this work. Now, whether it's the right way to go, that's an open question. I think that this has been an experiment in some ways in the cap world with the way the Leafs have allocated the money to their top four forwards. Obviously, it hasn't resulted in playoff success. They've had a ton of regular season success. That debate will continue on, but from a functional standpoint, the Leafs can make it work. And I would remind you too, Julian, after next season, John Tavares' $11 million contract comes off the books. Now, I don't think you necessarily want to just see him walk away if you look at how productive he's remained for the Leafs, but maybe he's signing a contract beyond this one that works a little bit more in the team's favor. And all of this can be symbiotic. And, Mitch Marner we'll be talking about his deal on next year's show at this time. I mean, I do think it can all work, but one thing we have now is Brad Treliving, a new general manager who wasn't tied to the decisions that were made when all these players were coming out of entry level, as was Kyle Dubas, either as the GM in charge or, someone who was there as second or third in command behind Lou Lamoriello. We have a fresh set of eyes on this kind of situation generally, but the Leafs can make this work from a Caps perspective, no question. And, it's going to be on the players to keep being productive, but you've already signed Matthews. It's just at the end of it, no matter we can debate what is the exact right number. Someone might say it's 10.5. Someone might say it's 11.5. Someone might say it's 11. The truth is, I don't think there's much debate that William Nylander is a difference-making player in the league. Those are really hard players to get. And if you let him go, what are you doing? And I think the Leafs get that, though. They get it. He wants to stay. They want to keep him. It's going to be a huge contract. He's a star player in the league. And stars get paid, man. And so don't be surprised. I'm telling you, that number might end up being a little higher than what's been out there when all is said and done, and it might be a little higher than a lot of people are expecting, but it's hard to argue against the fact that he's earned it. It might not be totally comparable to players around the league or all, people are going to say that, but we have to remember the cap is going up big time next season, and there's at least the implication or the idea that it's going to continue to go up over the life of any future contracts, and that's something that players are bringing to the table too. And Nylander's got all the leverage. He can walk out the door if he wants July 1st. He's having a career year, and he's clearly a huge part of what the Leafs are doing. And so I think they're going to get it done. It's just, let's see how long it takes to get there.
Can't wait until we do a future episode of this show, and the signing will break in the middle of our recording. That's what I think is going to happen.
I would love that. It's only if it breaks 5 minutes after that's annoying.
Yeah.
Because then we have to blow it all up again. If not, if it happens in the middle,
we would have to blow up an entire show. We would do a random Monday show, and then 5 minutes after we learn about that show's gone. That would be a lost episode.
I don't know. Nick's a wizard. I think we could just graft on a news opening or something. We'd find a way.
I guess.
I mean, look, that's the nature of doing business. We can't broadcast these things live, at least not yet, at least not every week.
No, not yet.
And so everything's recorded to some degree, and yeah, you run the risk you run.
You touched off on Ilya Samsonov in that earlier discussion. What are your thoughts on what he's going through right now with the Toronto Marlies not going through a great time at the NHL level?
Yeah, it's a difficult situation. I think, what's interesting here or notable here, maybe a better way to put it, he's dealing, I think, primarily with a mental sort of issue, a mental block, as opposed to just something that's, technical or in his form. And, we're talking about a goaltender who carried a lot of the Leafs' hopes last year, who played most of their biggest games. I know he got injured towards the end of the playoffs, but, was in net for a lot of their successes last season and, earned a raise to $3.55 million to what he's making this year. And it has not worked. And the team has worked with him. Like, they've given him little breaks already, not where they put him on waivers and send him down to the AHL the way I have this week. But they've had him not be the backup on certain nights and called Martin Jones up to be a backup to Joseph Wall. And I think they've tried kind of everything. And this is the newest or latest and maybe biggest Hail Mary yet, is to totally remove him from the situation as an NHL goaltender, to put him through waivers, which I think for any proven NHL player, I mean, it's an uncomfortable idea, right? As much as it was probably unlikely someone was going to grab him, you never know. And you might have to move, within 24 hours if just one team claims you. On top of that, it's kind of a public acknowledgement about how bad your situation's going. There's no positive spin to be spun here other than Martin Jones started the year as the Leafs' third goaltender. He's been great so far in limited action. He's allowed them to get through a tough time. But the best outcome here is still for Ilya Samsonov to regain some degree of form and the Leafs playing him. I just don't know if that's going to happen. I mean, I don't think the Leafs can know that, right? I mean, this is a pretty, it's a pretty extreme course of action to take. I mean, I don't blame them. He got to a point where he was second last in the entire league in save percentage for any number of goalies that have played meaningful number of minutes. And the other one that was below him is Antti Ranta, who's in the same spot in Carolina, was sent down to the AHL. I know he's since been recalled by the Hurricanes, but I mean, you're sort of desperate times call for desperate measures. And, on a human level, I hope the best for Ilya. I hope that he can kind of get in the right mental space to do what he does well when clearly he is at his best. And if not, I mean, I don't even know what could be next. I mean, everyone wants to say, well, what's the trade? Like I would say to you, who would they be trading for, with what assets, with what cap space? Like, how does that all work? I mean, I'm not saying the front office isn't looking at those options or thinking about them, but I think that I'll save you the homework. If you haven't looked at them or thought about them, there's not an easy answer. There's not like an obvious quick solution here. And that's why the Leafs are in the spot they're in. Samsonov is literally working one-on-one with Henry Toivonen, a goaltending coach within the organization. He's not practicing in the AHL. He's not at this time playing in the AHL. And the Leafs are hoping he can get back to the NHL at some point in the near future. And we'll have to see. But there's opportunity here. We haven't even talked about the Hildebeest.
Yeah.
Dennis Hildeby.
Yeah, he's supposed to be making his debut. I do want to ask one thing about Samsonov and what they have him going through with the Marlies. Like, I get we're not goalie experts, but the fact that he's not practicing or playing with them, at least to me, that's a bit of a surprise. But also, we've seen other goalies go through that, and it doesn't always work well. Jack Campbell earlier this year sent to Bakersfield and just had some stinkers of games. I wonder why the Leafs are going for the opposite approach.
Right. Well, and this is only the first week of it. So I don't see this going on weeks and weeks and weeks where he's kind of in limbo. I think that they're taking it a little bit more day by day to see how things go. But that has to be a factor, is that just by playing a game in the AHL, even when you're been an NHL quality goaltender, doesn't mean it's going to go well. You're playing behind a different team. It's a different game to some degree. And obviously, if you arrive there, you're not arriving there at your best. You're not arriving there ready to dominate the way you might at another time in your life. And so I think that's definitely a big part of it. But then the flip side, you're right. It's a weird situation because you're going to say, well, then how can he get better? I mean, we understand he can get better by maybe calming himself down, getting out of the grind of whether it's the media spotlight, the game prep, the practice at the NHL level. Like I can understand how that could become a negative thing, but you're almost like, how can you build yourself back up again without playing or practicing? And maybe the answer is this time next week when we're recording the show, he's playing games for the Marlies, and that's kind of how they end up. So, I don't know how that's all going to shake out just yet, but I think this is an example though of how far we've come in a lot of ways, or how things have changed. Just the fact, this truly is just a mental break at this point in time. They're obviously taking the opportunity to work on the physical aspects of the game and some of the technical ones too with him, but you just wouldn't have seen this type of thing, I don't think, in the past. And again, I've got no idea if it's going to work. Unfortunately, it's been tough for Ilya. It just feels like from the start of training camp, just never really got back to where he was. It's not to say he hasn't had good starts along the way, but it feels like he's been chasing it all year long. And, now he's in a position with Martin Jones playing well. And, once Joseph Woll gets healthy again, he just might not be one of the best two options in the organization, even when healthy. Even without acquiring someone, he just might not be on the NHL roster. And that's kind of the reality of his situation. And he's got to work his way back from that and fight through and battle to be in a position, I guess, to be one of the two goalies when this season really gets to its most important days.
And that is going to do it for Leafs Corner, our first one of 2024.
That was a long one.
That was a very long Leafs Corner.
Did I say anything I'm going to regret or what?
Nah.
Well, everyone freaked out when I said it was 90% sure Nylander would remain a Leaf. I'm now 98% sure. So
98%. You're laying a lot on the line with that one.
Well, if you already said 90, I'm not backing down. Now there's more information. There's more time. Obviously, there's been more talks and contracts. You always have to leave yourself a sliver of the unknown. Something could happen that you don't foresee. A black swan event, it's called in the financial world. Something
black swan event. I thought that was just a movie.
I think it's in the financial world, it's a reference to something you just don't see coming, like just something that you can't even almost imagine. It would be like us in 2019 predicting that they wouldn't be able to finish the 2019-20 NHL's regular season because of the pandemic. It's like it was on no one's radar. So, there could be something like that, but beyond the absolute unknown, I think it's going to happen.
Big Money Siege, let's get to the NHL All-Star game. It's Thursday. You're going to know which players, one from each team, will represent at this year's game, which will be in Toronto in February. What do we know about that process? And what are your thoughts on one player per team for this event?
I feel like there's a lot I could unload on this.
Please do.
It's a complicated process, right? Not every player necessarily wants to go to the All-Star game. And so I think that behind the scenes, there might be some degree of, I won't call it negotiation, but just let's face it. The league on Thursday night will announce one representative for every NHL team. Now, on some teams, San Jose, it might be tough, as an example, to say that the player there is an all-star in the class of the other players that are picked in the league.
Way to dump on San Jose there. Jesus.
Jesus
Christ.
Well, who's their all-star? I'll give you a minute to go to Hockey DB, and I'd like to see who you pick.
Okay, you know what? I will go to Hockey DB.
I'm also not trying to hate on them, but I'm just saying they're in a clear rebuild. Their best or most notable, I guess it's Thomas Hertl. Probably is
pretty good guess. He leads the team in points. Yes.
But and look at it, and Hertl's a great player. I'm not actually, but in the scope of what this is, the problem is you have teams like an Edmonton, or let's go around the league. There's so many teams where it's between 3 or 4 players, right? Like legitimate. You're like, wow, how do you choose between a Maserati and a Ferrari and a Porsche and it's a tough
Lamborghini,
Fisker
cars. What's a McLaren?
Yeah, and as I say, sorry, I'm really not trying to kick a team. I'm just trying to point out that the problem with one per team is that there's definitely some teams where it's difficult. And I will say this, I've become known, this is something I've become attuned to in the last couple of years, maybe just getting older, knowing more players. There's a lot of players who want to go, who aren't going to get a chance because, maybe they play beside the Lamborghini and then the other team is sending a Toyota Corolla. And it's not maybe entirely
Toyota
fair.
Corollas are nice vehicles. Their maintenance is not that tough, and they're fine.
That was an Easter egg for my dad. My dad has driven. It's funny. We were trying to figure out over the holidays. He's driven like 9 straight Toyotas, like going back as far as I can remember. He doesn't buy lots of new cars, but like, let's say he gets a new car every 3 to 4 years, like going back like 8 or 9 vehicles, he's had a Toyota. He will swear by it.
They're
so I'm also
cars.
not right. Good cars. Fine. But like not the sexiest. You don't have a car show to have Toyotas there, right? You have a car show to show off the goods.
That's true. That's true. So why not have a format that allows you to show off the goods? Why not have a format that allows, Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar to be announced as, guys who will for sure be at this event, as opposed to having fans, do the work for them?
Because I think they want to have interest in every market. And this is where maybe it's too old school of thinking, right? Like if you remember, like what has been the longest, this is not a new trope. But this has been out there that like the league would rather market teams versus stars and all that kind of stuff.
That's been a thing forever. Yes.
Right. And so I think this is born out of that. Now, I'm not saying we can't evolve beyond it. Like the question is, if you're a hockey fan in San Jose or Northern California, like maybe you still want to see Makar and McKinnon and McDavid and Matthews
and Bedard.
Like maybe you, and you understand that, hey, you're a Sharks fan deep down, but like, hopefully we get the next version of those guys because our team's going down this path. Like I do think the modern sports fan maybe is a little bit, it's not as hyper local as it used to be, right? Like it was local when I was a kid, Julian, in all seriousness, because you couldn't physically see other games. Like there was you would have had to get someone to mail you a VHS of a game. So someone would have had to like if I had a friend in Dallas, would have had to record a game on TV, physically put something in the mail. Who knows how long that would have taken to get to me? Like at best, I'm watching a week-old game. And so
that's how that's how it went down back.
Well,
in the
it didn't
days.
go. This is what happened. You didn't watch the rest of the league. You watched them when they came through your town. Like, and if you lived in somewhere like New York or whatever, of course you could see a little bit more because there's multiple teams. But in general, you understand the idea here.
Yeah.
But I just don't think we live in that world anymore. I don't think as much as I do think people root mostly for the team in their community. There's lots of examples. I mean, my nephew lives in Mississauga and he's a diehard Habs fan. So, I mean, like it's just because he loved the Habs when he was a kid, and there he goes. Like it wasn't, no one made him. It just he got onto that, and then there he is. And I think there's lots of that stuff. So, I guess what I'm getting at is, I understand the idea of wanting to include all the teams. But I think there's too many limitations to it. And you look at some of the sort of most potent teams in the league, the best teams in the league, like they should have 3 or 4 players there. And the math doesn't really add up for that because there's only 12 extra players after the original 32 for fans to vote in. And so, the game's in Toronto. Austin Matthews is going to be the Leafs named representative by the NHL.
Are you allowed to say that?
Well, I can because it's my show's called the Chris Johnston Show.
Oh no! I think that's the one spicy thing you were worried about. You just said that in front of everybody. Oh no, Austin Matthews! What a shock!
No. But I'm just saying. Well, it could be a shock though because quite literally, you if you've been watching the Leafs closer this year, or you paid attention to the zeitgeist, that means William Nylander's not picked. Now, I think it's reasonable to expect Leaf fans because there's a fan voting portion. We'll probably get at least one more player in the game. It's probably going to be Nylander, but it's not a guarantee. I don't know. I don't know the perfect answer. You want your fans to care about this, but I do think ultimately, come on, let's just get all the best players. I don't care if they play on 17 teams. Like if you got 42 of the best players, or 44, I guess it would be, and they played only on 22 teams, would it be the end of the world?
Okay. There's one other thing that I realize in all of this too, and maybe you disagree, maybe you agree, I'm not sure. But the hyper-localness of all this made me realize something. I think that still exists for following teams regularly, but in terms of having guys represent the All-Star game, we're totally in agreement of that, where, you should have the best players there. But what about the TV product for everybody watching those games? Because, there's a reason why they switched up that All-Star skills format, right? And in recent years, I'm not seeing a lot of people clamor to watch the All-Star game on TV. So Yes, you're right. I think you're right in the fact that we should have the best players there, but until the game itself turns into like a must watch for a lot of fans, and I'm not going off numbers, I'm just really going off of how people talk about it.
Right.
Isn't it more of a moot point? To discuss who
Probably.
should be there. Probably.
We sit here and argue online about who should be at the game, and then no one watches no one watches the game, but like,
But people will don't watch the game. It's true. I think this year might be different because it's in Toronto, and a significant amount of people will watch. But
it's in Toronto, and there's a Thursday night event.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it's going to go. Like, this is not a prediction, but you're going to have the players in like street clothes and skates on the ice in some way. And they're going to be picking teams. And, anyone who watched the draft format way back in the day, I covered those ones in Carolina. I remember Columbus, I think, was the last one. It's kind of fun. It was off script. There was, I think it was some adult beverages consumed that might have led to the point is there was definitely some what were viral moments in those times out of that. And so I don't know if this will replicate it or how. I don't know how it's going to look, if it's all celebrities anyway, but there's at least now you're going to have 4 captains picking their own team. So we're not by division. Then you have the skills competition on the Friday where the individual winner, we ain't talking about teams anymore. We're talking about an individual winner who's going to make $1 million.
Yes.
Can you imagine what that Friday night's going to look like for that individual and his friends?
I mean, they could always donate that money to charity. That's sort of what I expect. That's sort of what I expect from the guy who wins.
No way. Sorry. There might be a charitable aspect, but
I think I don't know. I sort of expect, like, if it's a player who's well off with that money, I see them donating that money. If Connor Bedard makes that
don't do that.
I'm not saying,
because don't set that as like they have to donate it. Like the whole point
I don't think
of this,
they have to donate it. I think that's what's going to happen.
The whole point of establishing this is to give a little bit more reason to care, right?
But like until the NHL players do it for me, my default is that they won't.
Right, but we've never seen this. It's 12 individuals. We don't know the 12 yet, but it's going to be the 12 of the best players in the world are competing.
Are we going to know the 12 tomorrow? Sorry, tomorrow.
No, I mean, we're going to then, once on Thursday night, we're going to know 32 of the players in the game. We could probably guess or start asking are you in or out? We're going to have a better idea. Mm-hmm. But even still, it's going to be 12 of the best players on earth having to do individual competitions, a series of them. So like they don't just do it once and then like disappear into the back and goof around, right? Like They're going to have to take it somewhat seriously. And one of them walks out of the building with $1 million. And I'm going to guess, of course, there's a charitable component. I'm not saying, but like they have to earn this $1 million against the other best players in the world. So if they want to go out and ring up $100,000 bill with whatever, doing things I can never imagine in Toronto, I'd say all the power to them.
Doing things you would never imagine in Toronto. I don't know, man. I just naturally assume you're in a much different tax bracket than I am, so you might not be that far off.
Dude. If I ring up a $200 bill in Toronto, it's been a wild night. That means like a couple guys got wings. Someone got a second beer.
Damn.
Like,
damn,
but I'm just saying, like,
yeah,
I think it'll be fun, but what does it look like on TV? At the end of the day, what we're talking about, I have no idea. Like, how does this come off? I think there's promise to that. I don't know what can change with the day itself, because then it's a 3-on-3 tournament with 4 teams. We've seen that now for a number of seasons. Obviously, those teams will have captains, and so that's a little different versus divisions. But I don't know that that's going to be more of a TV product or not. But I do think the Thursday draft and the Friday skills, now that it's individual with big money on the board, Big Money CJ approves.
What the? Big Money CJ approves. Sorry, that broke me for a second.
Dude, you call me that. I've never called myself that once until now. You've been calling me that for a couple of years.
Oh man, yeah. One day I'll explain the story of why Big Money CJ came to be. One day I'll explain that story. One day.
Yeah,
anyway,
not today.
Not today. Let's save that. Did you watch Canada get eliminated at the World Juniors? Have you been watching the World Juniors much?
I did watch the World Juniors. I really liked the tournament. And I get it. Like it seems to like go in waves, right? Like there was a time it felt like everybody was watching and everyone was pounding their chest and loving it. I feel like we're maybe not in the same era now, but I just find, first of all, for me, it's a chance to see a lot of these players play because I'm just going to call it. I'm not in OHL, WHL rinks. I'm not at NCAA games. It's not the normal course of my work. Obviously, I'm very familiar with a lot of the names in the games, but I haven't seen a lot of them play. So it's that chance. And then I just love the fact that I feel like the big games in this tournament always deliver. There are lead changes. There is chaos. There is heartbreak. There is horrible officiating, as we've seen in the last couple of days. And I just find it pretty compelling. And you look at this time of year, I mean, I watched some NFL games over the sort of Christmas and New Year's period of time. What else is there to watch? I don't know. Like as you know, I'm not a big movie guy and stuff. So for me,
College
it's just
football. You're not watching any of the bowl games?
I've never watched a college football game.
I find it really mesmerizing that there are a lot of people who I'll ask about that. They don't show an interest in those college bowl games, but they'll show an interest in the World Juniors, where both of them, if you really think about it, it boils down to the same thing. All the teams that are involved have highly touted prospects who we will probably see at some big level, but they also have a bunch of kids who this might be their peak. Like, this is as big as it's going to get for them. And you see the heartbreak and you see the emotions wear on their sleeves because it's kids at the end of the day. So, I'm really intrigued. I'm intrigued at why people will go all in on the World Juniors, but not so much on collegiate football, but also it's Americans. It's
I don't have a rooting interest. It's that simple.
That's true. And a lot of people who follow college football, they're like, if you went to Alabama or you're into the program, like there's an affinity to those schools. I can understand that, but it is interesting whenever people are like, oh man, I can't get into that at all. But it's like, if you boil it down, it's more or less the same thing.
Right. I should be clear then. It's not that I couldn't be interested in it. I just have never, I recognize there would be a time commitment there I'm not making. Like, I'm not watching normal college football as much as everyone knows that listens to this podcast a lot. I'm a Cowboys fan. I don't even follow the NFL draft. Honestly, like, I will find out who the Cowboys drafted after it's done. And I'll find I don't even know the top, but I'm just saying, I don't even know who the top prospects are. I'm not pretending to be an expert. And so I can't get into college football because if I turned on a random game, I'm not betting on this stuff. Like, I don't care. Like, I recognize it's amazing athletics and it's like, I know why people care. I just personally never cared about it.
And that's okay, by the way. I'm not trying to judge. That was just an observation I wanted to make.
Right. Well, and honestly, I get why people maybe are like a little down on the World Juniors to some degree, but I'm just like, if you actually just like watching hockey, which is me,
sure.
Like, I'm not saying that because I'm paid to do it, or like, I just enjoy watching hockey games. It's freaking competitive. It matters to the people involved, and you can tell that, right? You're not watching like preseason NHL games where, okay, it matters to like 10 of the people on the ice because they're not going to play in the main games, but like, it matters. There's stakes, there's atmosphere. Like, I just find it enjoyable, and I'll still watch even after Canada lost, of course. Like, I'm curious to see what happens now in the tournament. My observations of the Canadian team are not profound. They never found their rhythm. Ironically, in the game against Czechia that they lost in the quarterfinal, the best they played in the tournament was for portions of that game. Like, it's one of these ones, if Canada wins on a weird bounce with 10 seconds left instead of the other way around, they're probably going into the semifinals feeling really good for the first time all tournament because they've kind of been searching for it. They've had players in and out with injury and all this other stuff, but they sort of unlocked something in that game. And then unfortunately for them, it's a bounce the wrong way. But, even as a Canadian, I have a global enough perspective. I'm happy to see other countries have success. I think it's ultimately, at the end of the day, it is unquestionably better for the sport if more countries produce more great hockey players. Like, that's better for the long-term viability. It's better for long-term competition. I mean, we're going to have to live a long frickin' time, Julian, for hockey to ever have a World Cup that rivals the way soccer's World Cup is now, but it could happen in 80 years. Like, who knows? If I'm not predicting that, I'm not betting on it. I'm just saying, like if you have more and more places where the game becomes part of the culture or part of what people want to do, it's not going to probably grow to soccer's World Cup because, let's face it, a lot of factors working against it. But even if it grows into something where 12 countries could win it, like could conceivably win it, that would be a huge step from where we are now. Because I don't know where we're at. Maybe 5 countries could conceivably win a true best on best men's hockey tournament at this point in time. It's probably not deeper than 5.
Yeah.
But in 30
you
years,
have
it
that
could
right.
be 12 countries that have a puncher's chance, like that have like a legitimate shot, not just to get to the quarters, not just to upset one of the big countries, but maybe to go on a run. And that's progress. So, I'm not sure we measure progress by one World Junior tournament, but then I know a lot of Canadians forgot what happened last year, where Canada won against Slovakia on an all-world overtime goal by a generational player in Connor Bedard, 1-on-4 in the quarters. And they won the gold medal against Czechia in overtime after losing to Czechia earlier in the tournament. So, like, I didn't go back and watch those games, but when you're winning by those narrow margins, there's probably times you could have lost it either by a save, a bad bounce for the other team, one that hit the post and went out instead of went in. This one didn't work out in Canada's favor, but I'll still be watching. On Thursday we got 2 semifinals, and I'm kind of rooting for Sweden. I have to say, like, not just because like that's a country that obviously has a huge hockey history, and they've had a lot of tough luck or poor performance or whatever it is in this tournament, and they're on home soil, and the atmosphere looks awesome in Gothenburg if you've watched the games. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious to see how the Swedish team does. I'm guessing Team USA is most likely to win the gold medal, but it's single elimination hockey, baby. Anything can happen.
1 gold in 42 years for Sweden. I too would love to see it for Sweden in their home with home advantage too. I personally would love to see that.
Right, and they still needed some favorable calls and an overtime goal against Switzerland, though. I'm just saying, like,
garbage.
I guess my point is we could be talking about how Sweden and Canada went out just as easily on this podcast. Like, the margins are so narrow. I think people forget that in hockey sometimes. I don't know why. Like, obviously, Canada's had the biggest run of success at the top levels of the sport, but nothing is guaranteed to anyone. I think that's probably the biggest argument to watch games like this. And when we get a World Cup back and hopefully Olympics and all that going again, is like, who knows what's going to happen? Because it's in one game of hockey. It's crazy. I mean, I remember when Switzerland beat Canada in Turin. That's a long time ago, 2006. I think Canada had like 52 shots in the game or something. Like, I'm not saying they played a perfect game, but it's a tough game to lose when you have 52 shots, but it can happen. That's the sport.
Did you watch any of the PWHL games this week?
I've been watching a lot of hockey. I watched both. Yes. I've watched both of the first 2 games, the Toronto, New York opener on January 1st, and then the Montreal game at Ottawa on January 2nd. And I got to tell you, it was like spine tingling. I have to say, the energy is unreal. And I don't want to at all like put myself forward here, because I haven't been out there like hitting the drum for, women's sport in hockey, but I'm just happy I know a lot of people have, and to see it not just launch, but launch at that angle. We talk about launch angle in baseball. Like, this thing was like off the bat, straight to the moon, dude, right out of the gate. And I just think it's so cool. I was feeling like literally like the hair was up on my arm watching it the before the game in Toronto. And then it almost went to another level. I don't know if you saw the second night, but with 8,300 people in the crowd in Ottawa, new record for a pro women's game.
Yeah.
And just like the game itself was awesome. It went back and forth. There's like a Philippe penalty shot that stopped. There's what looked like the first goal in Ottawa history, and it went under the side of the goal and it comes back in review. Then Ottawa does score. Then Montreal comes back, back and forth, goes to overtime. Like, it was even if you don't, and I will profess, I don't know all the players up and down the rosters. Like, I'm not watching it in that degree, but it was just exciting. And you could see the emotion in the crowd. I'm pumped, man. I'm actually going to a game in the crowd in February in Ottawa. I got family down that way, and one of the Christmas gifts I gave to my niece and nephew was bought some tickets to a game in Ottawa.
That's nice.
On Family Day weekend there. But I'm just pumped to go and sit in the crowd and watch one of these games. I mean, it's impossible to get a ticket. I know right now in Toronto. I don't know the exact status around the league, but it seems like it's all been positive, and I don't know. It just feels like this is for real, if you know what I'm saying.
I feel you, and I wish I lived in a PWHL market, because if I was in Montreal right now, I would be I'd be rounding up friends. Like I'd probably be going with Andrew Berkshire from Game Over, Matsumo as well. We'd be going to a game. We would be going to games, and I can't wait until PWHL Calgary becomes a thing. If that's in the works, I don't have any intel on that, but I got to watch a little bit of the Montreal Ottawa game. I went to a bar and it was up on a screen. It was up on one or two screens, or at least one screen I was watching, and I was trying to watch that at the same time as the Calgary Minnesota game. It was just cool to be in a bar where that's just on the TV, and it's the norm. And that's the whole point of these things, right? Like I'm really happy that this league was able to get off the ground, and I'm really happy that at the Athletic we're going to have some really great coverage. Haley Salvian's been leading the charge on that. But yeah, like I think the quality of the game, the look of the league as well. I get some people will complain about the jerseys and the branding, but I think this is actually a really good start. It's a good start.
Did you know that they put this thing together in 6 months?
Yeah,
I would actually argue it's cooler that they're starting. This literally is the original 6 of this league. Yeah. And it's born out of a place like this came out of nowhere. I mean, obviously it was a lot of years of work, but in late June, early July, this idea was formed and they just went for it. I think it's cooler that they have basically anonymous jerseys, because guess what's going to happen over time? There's going to become fan bases and mascots and team nicknames and maybe different color schemes, or like all that stuff is going to evolve kind of naturally. Like you're watching the start of something, and on the first 2 nights, totally sold out. I mean, Ottawa, I don't know if you know much about the rink there, Julian. They had originally only sold about 4,500 tickets. That is the lower bowl. And they weren't even planning on selling the upper bowl, but they had no choice because the demand was so high.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think even the owners or the people, I'm not sure they would have allowed themselves to dream this big. That's what I took from it. I read a really great story that Haley and Ian Mendez wrote on the game, specifically in Ottawa on night 2. And Carlo McLeod, the head coach of the Ottawa team, was just talking about how, like, yeah, we could come in here and talk about a result. Their team lost 3-2 in overtime. That game. He's like, that would be missing the whole freaking point of it. Like, something special is going on there. And I don't think it's going to stop. It's not to say there won't be roadblocks and difficult times ahead. I mean, look at the NHL is a pretty wildly successful league with 32 teams. We could still talk about some problem spots and things that go on. Like that will probably always be part of the conversation, but they're off to such a strong start. I mean, I feel like it won't be long before you're seeing more markets, and in the markets they're in, like Mattamy, where the Leafs play, or sorry, where the Toronto team plays, is the old Maple Leaf Gardens. It's like 2,500 seats. Like, it's already like, come on. If you go on StubHub, the tickets are ridiculous. Like they should be, clearly the demand outstrips the supply right now. And so hopefully they can find themselves to a different venue next year where there's more seats to sell. And, obviously that's going to keep the thing going. But I mean, I have like this, it could not be better. I'll say that. It could not have started better than it did.
Very well said. Did you watch the Winter Classic?
A little bit. I watched it first period.
Okay, I watched like parts of the second period and the third period.
I watched the first period and the highlights.
Okay. I mean, it looked cool. I mean, it's cool that like the idea, if you would have told me like 3 years ago, Vegas and Seattle would play each other in a Winter Classic, I'd be like, huh? But they found a way to make it look really good, at least.
Yeah, I love the opening. The crowd looked like it had a great time. Obviously, it helps when the home team wins. It's New Year's Day. At the risk of repeating myself, I will say, I'm not telling everyone at home they have to watch every outdoor game, because I get it. It might get a little like stale from afar. The novelty may be worn off. Ultimately, when the puck drops, it is just an NHL game. But if you're in the building, if you're there, I know producer Nick was there doing his work for Sportsnet. I mean, I think it's a cool atmosphere. It's neat for the market. It's cool to have that many people in a game. It's once in how many years? Like, it's not like we see a lot of repeat venues over time. So that it might be 20 years before there's another outdoor game in Vegas. In Seattle rather. And so I thought it was good. I don't have any like hot takes on the Winter Classic. I still think it has a place on the calendar. I think it's at the point now where it makes sense. They're going to have one every year. It's going to be a killer in the place where it's had. Like, there's never empty seats at these things. Like, it's always sold out.
Yeah.
I just think it's a cool event on the ground. If you're flipping around on New Year's Day, maybe you don't sit and watch the whole game. I didn't even watch the whole game, as I mentioned, but I still think it's great that they have the event itself.
What about the next one? Do we know anything about where the next one will be?
It's up in the air a little bit. You know, the NHL has toured the Ohio State Stadium, and I know there's some desire to try to bring the game to Columbus. From what I understand, there's some concerns about that stadium in terms of being winterized enough to have a Winter Classic there. So I don't know if it's going to happen next year. I mean, it's been 12 minutes since Chicago was in an outdoor game, so you wonder about. I mean, Chicago. I'm just kidding, but Chicago has been in a lot of outdoor games, including one many years ago at Wrigley Field that I covered for the Canadian Press back in the day, both as an opponent as the host, and now they have Connor Bedard on the team, and so that's a very strong market for the NHL in the States. Obviously, a strong TV market. You have a very marketable player, so you wonder, do they find a way to get them involved? I mean, let's see where it shakes down. I do think that Columbus should be on everyone's radar, though. The Blue Jackets are one of a handful of teams that have never played an outdoor game, and I think Ohio State is an appealing venue. Just not certain it's going to come together in time for the 2025 version, but I do think we'll see outdoor NHL hockey at that venue at some point in the future, and that Bedard guy is pretty good in Chicago, so maybe they'll find a way to feature him on New Year's Day next year.
I think so. I realize we're just jumping through all these different topics while our brains are kind of wired as they are right now. Do you have any thoughts on the Ryan Hartman situation in Minnesota?
Ooh, open-ended question.
Okay.
I mean, do you want me? I think this stuff happens all the time. Honestly. Like, that's not excusing it, though. I don't know. That's where I find kind of the line is a hard one to draw, because first of all, I do understand why, there was a time when players weren't mic'd in games, coaches weren't mic'd in games, referees weren't mic'd in games. And if that was your job and you're used to not doing it that way, all of a sudden someone's to put a mic on you, it is naturally a little bit invasive. As much as it's cool when a guy scores an overtime winner in the cup final and he's mic'd up and you can hear the celebration, like, that's great. But then there's a lot of other stuff that's maybe a little bit more, you just wonder where, who hears it and where it ends up, because, the ice it's a different workplace than you and I work in, Julian. You and I talk into a microphone for a living. So I know that what comes out of here, I got to own it, but it's a little different when you're not used to wearing one. So there was an agreement made years ago that in exchange for wearing those microphones, that it wouldn't be used against the players. And so it wasn't a factor ultimately in what player safety was ruling when they gave Hartman the $4,400 fine for intentionally high sticking Cole Perfetti, basically in retaliation for something that happened to his teammate Kirill Kaprizov in a game the day before in Winnipeg. I just think this sort of thing, I don't want to brush it off and be like it's nothing, but I don't know. I'm not sure what should be different, because if players start getting nailed for that, they might be like, okay, I'm never wearing a microphone again. So does that serve the interest of the league? Even Perfetti, like I wish I could talk to him. He didn't seem that upset about it. I don't know if you saw the way he spoke about it with the reporters in Winnipeg. He was pretty matter of fact, though. He's just like, he said he whacked me because of this. Like, I guess we'd like to say this doesn't exist in the sport, but I mean, we all watch it, right? Like, last night there was a moment I was watching the Kings Leafs game, and Austin Matthews gets dumped in kind of a vulnerable position by Pierre-Luc Dubois. And, I think a lot of people were celebrating that the Leafs went and at least sort of roughed up Dubois, and like nothing bad came out of it. But it was a response thing. Like the whole game is kind of a version of response. And so I'm certainly not condoning the actions, but it's hard for me to be like, I can't believe Ryan Hartman did that, because I sort of feel like that's the game, but I don't know. Am I, you tell me, am I like on the wrong side of the dinosaur curve here? Like how do you feel?
I think it's really weird that we have that rule in with the mic stuff, but if it's the rule, I guess it's the rule. I think you do make a good point that if we start messing with that to one degree, yes, players aren't going to wear mics anymore, and that affects a part of the NHL product. But I mean, I haven't heard the audio for myself, whatever was said, but like, if it's something that should be used, if something really bad was said, like, that has to cause some kind of concern, right?
True. And that's actually a good point you raised. I haven't heard the audio. Like, I don't know how it was said, what was said.
I don't know.
Like, we've heard how Perfetti sort of relayed the conversation or the dialogue to reporters, but I don't know. I might have a different opinion if we ever hear the audio. It's funny, the Jets account on X, nay Twitter, kind of teased that the next version of their, I can't remember what they call their series, but it's, sort of behind the scenes series that they put out as a team. I think they said comes out January 16th, but they kind of teased that maybe we'll hear the audio then. I don't know if that's the case or not.
Interesting.
But, I'd like to, I reserve the right to change my opinion if I hear what's on the tape, but it's hard to, I don't know.
I'm not sure either. I'm really not sure.
Like, I don't know how much he crossed the line. I guess it's sort of understood within the game that there's some amount of retribution. It's a weird thing though. Also, like, as Perfetti himself said, like, he had nothing to do with the original hit.
Yeah.
Dude's taking a face off. He just gets whacked in the face for a couple stitches.
I mean, he should be penalized for that. Like, that was very blatantly, like, offside.
Right, but are you saying he should be suspended 4 games? Like, I don't know about that.
But doesn't he have a history of being a bad... But Brian Hartman has a history of being a...
I think he's had 3 suspension and 7 fines, if I remember.
He has a history of being a dirty player. He does.
Right, well... It's fair. It's one of these weird... It lands right in the gray. Because when I think about it... Well... Also, here's the other thing. Like, I mean, does it even matter though? I was going to say, did Hartman even know the guy's mic'd up? But does that even matter?
I don't even know if that matters.
I know.
It's a lot to think about this.
Well, when you think about it, just like imagine if all of a sudden you can never say anything that isn't used against you. I don't know.
Man, to your point, there might be a larger conversation to be had.
It's an aggressive sport though. Like, a lot of stuff gets said. A lot of things happen. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm guessing that is actually nowhere near the worst thing that's happened even in the last 5 days. It's just that we've got to know about it through this sort of unique set of circumstances around it, but not for the faint of heart, this sport.
Since this was a long episode and we packed a lot of information on it, and it's the first week of the year, do you have a stick tap? If you don't, I'm okay with moving it to next week.
I have a stick tap, but an easy one.
Okay.
Max Pacioretty, my man.
I like that. That's cool.
I mean, almost a year between games after missing all the months on the initial Achilles tear, to see him come back and play for Washington on Wednesday. Hard not to give a little stick tap to Max. Just an unfortunate set of circumstances in a career with 2 Achilles injuries back to back at his age. If you actually look across his last 100 games, he has something like 98 points. Like, unfortunately, he's been robbed of this time, but let's hope this is the beginning of a healthy run for him with the Capitals. And I do think that for all the rehab and work that goes into just getting back, he's deserving a stick tap to see that through, to push through. Obviously he's played a lot of games in the league. He's made a lot of money, but the love of the game clearly still brought him back to where he's playing in the NHL today.
Okay, then I will give my stick tap to Anne-Sophie Betez, who plays for the PWHL Montreal team, who was the goal scorer of the overtime winner that gave Montreal its first win over Ottawa earlier this week in the first ever OT game in PWHL history. All right, I wasn't sure if you were going to be able to come up with a good stick tap segment.
We could have given it to Ella Shelton, too. She scored the first ever goal in PWHL history for New York on
absolutely
New Year's Day, but...
We absolutely could have done that as well. Just a really good week all around when it comes to the sport that we cover. Awesome.
Yeah. We're back, bud. This is the 4th different calendar year we've recorded a show.
When you put it like that, that's really special. We've done over 200 episodes of this show.
I know, but we started late 2021, all of 2022, all of 2023. Now we're early 2024. I love that.
Man.
Continuity, my friend.
Like I said at the end of 2023, this train is not stopping. So get on it, because we've got more episodes to come. Subscribe to our show, however you listen to our show. Subscribe to the SDPN YouTube channel, which I believe not that far off from 100,000 subscribers.
And if you're not subscribed already, like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
Hit that button. Smash, smash, smash.
Whoa. I don't want to break my microphone. Whoa. I'll calm down. Anyway. We'll be back on Monday with a brand new episode of the CJ Show. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long. Happy New Year. And peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.